Welcome to the Stop Ruining My Childhood podcast.
A sometimes nostalgic, sometimes cynical look back at pop culture.
Join us as we revisit movies, cartoons, and live-action TV of the 80s and 90s and ask the question,
does this hold up, or did I just ruin my childhood?
My name is Megan.
And I'm Steve.
And today we are going to talk about the A-Team, the live-action TV show of the 1980s, which I think most people remember for two things, the van and Mr. T.
That's true.
So, if you haven't joined us before, we have a cycle where we watch a cartoon one week, and then a live-action TV show the next week, and then a movie the following week. But we interrupted that cycle last week to bring you a bonus episode for Easter on Superbook. So, before that, we watched Alvin and the Chipmunks. Now we're talking about the A-Team, and next week, we had a fan request for Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So that's going to be our movie, not from the 80s, but still part of our childhoods.
Yes.
So
a little bit earlier than the 80s.
A little bit. Yeah, so today we're still in April, though, and for Easter we had a number of Easter treats that we had not tried since we were kids, and we're continuing with that theme today.
So our snack review today is the Cadbury Egg. I'm sure everyone remembers the Cadbury Egg from their childhood. They're still out today. You can easily buy Cadbury Eggs at pretty much any store or convenience store that you go to. And so we've actually got 3 different kinds of Cadbury Egg here.
Yeah, so the Cadbury Egg, it's an interesting story. Cadbury was actually established in 1824. And they started by doing drinking chocolate, which is what they called hot chocolate back then.
Oh, okay.
And then they wanted to do moldable chocolate. As they were playing around with hot cocoa recipes, they discovered this. So you take the first...
I'm going for the regular Cadbury.
The regular.
Just the normal, original Cadbury Egg.
Yeah. So they merged with another company, and they started doing these cream-filled eggs, which is basically fondant. Steve was making a face about the fondant. And they had those in the early 1900s, and then in the current form was introduced in 1963. It was Fry's Creme Eggs, the company that they had merged with in England. And then in 1971, it became Cadbury Creme Eggs.
All right, not a huge fan of the regular Cadbury Creme Egg flavor. Really, really, really sugary sweet.
The fondant
or cream or whatever it is in it. And it's too much, I think. It's a little too much for me. And I feel like I felt the same way as a kid. One of my brothers really, really likes these, but I was never... I've eaten them, but it's not like my favorite.
That's kind of one of the controversies. When you split open the Cadbury Creme Egg, it's white with a little bit of like yellow-orange, so it does look kind of like the middle of an egg.
Right. Which
is kind of the fun part of it. In the U.S., Hershey's puts out the Cadbury Creme Egg, and in the U.K., it's the Cadbury Company. And they've said that the U.S. version is sweeter, which I don't doubt, having tasted this. One time when I was a kid, my mom used to make these cookies that had sweetened condensed milk, and I loved them, and I was like, oh, if I like those cookies, maybe I'll just like just eating sweetened condensed milk. So I took a can and I cracked it open and I took a spoonful, and that's what this is like.
Yes.
That unfortunate incident. It's a little much.
Yeah, I remember Cadbury Creme Eggs not only because it was a big piece for during Easter and things like that, but also I remember the commercials, right? They had the rabbit that did the buck, 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 right? That did like the chicken sounds, and then they would move them into other... Sometimes they'd have a lion with rabbit ears on, and they just had all sorts of different stuff.
So that's the thing, that apparently they weren't really that popular in the 70s, and because of that campaign, they became more popular in the 80s. So the caramel eggs were actually launched in 94, and then the chocolate were launched in 99, but have you ever had a chocolate one?
I just had it, and it's phenomenal.
Is it?
Yeah, I like the chocolate cream egg way more than the normal cream egg.
I have to get a drink of water because the cream egg is still... It's like coating my tongue. It's so sweet.
So yeah, the chocolate cream egg is really... It's like almost fudgy in the inside.
Yeah, it didn't spill out.
It doesn't spill out. We cut one in half, and it cuts pretty cleanly, and it's almost like brownie fudge almost. So yeah, I'll try the caramel as well. The caramel, from looking at it, the caramel cream egg really spills. Like, it's basically looks like they just made a chocolate egg and filled it with liquid caramel.
Okay, these are gluten-free, so now I can eat it. I put it in my mouth
It's too
and I
late. You
held
had it
it
in your mouth already.
The chocolate is good.
Yeah, right? I like the chocolate one quite a bit.
It's more like a truffle.
Let's.
That's something of the original that I always felt like the chocolate I liked, but I didn't like the inside.
Okay, so I'm going to try the caramel one now.
All right, try the caramel.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely has the caramel taste to it. It's not as overpowering. Neither the chocolate or the caramel are as overpowering as the original.
I really like the caramel. Yeah.
Yeah, those are really good. So I guess the newer versions to me I prefer. I would like the chocolate cream eggs and I would like the caramel cream eggs. Yeah. I still am not a huge fan of the... It's surprising that the original would be sweeter than the chocolate and caramel. But it is.
It's fondant. It's like a liquidy fondant. And you know, one of the variations of this, they sell just the fondant in like a tube.
Oh, God, why?
I don't know why
would you do that to someone?
They also had, for a while, they had a white chocolate one in New Zealand. I can't imagine that with white chocolate. It would be even worse.
Yeah, because the white chocolate's not going to have as much taste as the chocolate.
So they have a berry version and a mint version at different times, but I
would try the berry version. I'm not a huge mint fan, but I know you're not either.
Yeah, I can't have mint.
But the chocolate and the caramel weren't bad. So this is the tough part, though.
Wait. Before we go to our review, I just want to say that ad campaign you were talking about, they ran 2 ad campaigns, which is kind of unusual, but something that Geico picked up on. Like, Geico will run, 3 ad campaigns at the same time. Yeah. And the one was How Do You Eat Your Cadbury Egg, where they had, historical figures eating the Cadbury,
yes.
Cartoon versions.
I remember that.
And that became a little bit popular, but then when they had the one that you talked about where...
The animals.
The bunny is so cute, and it's clucking.
Yes.
It's so adorable. So yeah, a fun Easter treat.
This is the difficult part, rating it.
The difficult part.
Okay, out of 5 Mohawks.
Okay.
For Mr. T.
If you haven't joined us before, we do 1 out of 5 for the snack, 1 out of 10
for the show.
For the show.
Movie.
So 5 Mohawks for Mr. T.
So are we grading the original Cadbury egg?
We have to grade the original.
Of them?
No, because the other 2 didn't come till later.
Okay, so grading the original Cadbury egg, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, it's not inedible, but it's not
close.
Like right now. If there was another one in front of me, I wouldn't want to eat it right now. I've had enough just from that half.
5 out of 5 for the caramel and the chocolate.
Yeah, but we weren't grading those. We're grading the original Cadbury egg.
Okay, so we're going to wait for the sting. That's a little sound effect. Yeah! 2 out of 5 Mohawks.
2 out of 5 Mohawks.
For the Cadbury Creme Egg. That's the original. We both agree, though, 5 out of 5 for the newer ones. I highly recommend, if you see these in the store, you're thinking about getting them for your kids for their Easter baskets, gravitate toward the chocolate and the caramel.
The chocolate and the caramel. They don't need the regular one. But yes, 2 out of 5 Mohawks for Mr. T, or as Mr. T would say, I pity the fool who eats Cadbury egg. There we go.
There we go. All right, so what we're going to do now that we've had our little nostalgic snack review, we're going to talk about the A-Team. So, Steve, can you give us just an overview of the show as a whole, and then later when we get into the episodes, we'll give a summary of each episode.
Sure, yeah. So the overview of the show really is the fact that it's about 4 military people. They're men who are part of a military covert operations group. At the time when this was written in a show, it was actually from Vietnam. Right, because Vietnam had just ended in the 70s, and so now we pick up with the show in the 80s. They had been part of a covert operations group who were framed for a crime they didn't commit. They were put in jail, they broke out, and now they're on the run. But of course, they didn't do a crime, and they're good guys. So they use their covert military skills to help people. They're basically, I guess, what you'd call mercenaries. Like, they help people for hire, but sometimes they help people and don't take money. Like, it depends on what people have, right?
Yeah.
If people have the money to hire them, they do it. But a lot of times they end up helping people that don't really have much either.
It reminded me of the show Leverage. Like, sometimes they take money, but if the people really need their help and they don't have money, they're not taking money.
I mean, this is early 80s. I feel like this theme set up a number of shows.
Yeah.
You have Leverage, right? In the 90s, you had The Pretender, where he had a certain set of skills because he was a genius.
Forgot about The
Pretender. So he would pretend to be different people, and he would help people out.
Yeah.
Right? You always have this system of a person or a team that are doing, basically, selflessly helping others, basically. And that's kind of what's happening here. And so you have 4 people on the team. You have Hannibal, who is a colonel, and he's the leader, and he kind of makes the plan. You have Face, who is military intelligence, and he's kind of like, as it says, Face Man, he's kind of the face of the group. He's the guy that, he does, like, disguises, he goes in undercover a lot, things of that nature. And
he flirts with all the ladies.
He flirts with all the ladies.
Because he's got the face.
He's a ladies' man.
Yeah.
Right? You have B.A. Baracus, who's Mr. T, famously, who many people think of as the muscle, but actually, Mr. T was, his character of B.A. was like motor pool. He was like a mechanic.
Okay.
And he could build a lot of things, which they often did. He basically, like, seems intimidating or threatening because of his size and muscles, but he very rarely is violent. He actually is not, that's not, like, what he's about.
Yeah.
And then you have Murdoch, who is who's crazy, right? But he's a very established pilot. He can fly helicopters, he can fly planes, and yes, he's a little bit insane. They actually, I think, broke him out of a mental institution at one point. But he's got a good heart, and he's always for the team, basically. And so that's the whole premise, is they're just moving around as they're running from the military and the law and helping people along the way.
Yeah, so it was on for 5 seasons, 98 episodes, so basically enough to be in syndication.
Yes.
From 83 to 87, and then the reboot film in 2010, and then they had a sequel planned for 2012, but they canceled it based on how the reboot film did. Now, we watched the reboot film, and we'll talk about it a little bit toward the end, but that's not, like, obviously our focus today. But the A-team is the term for the team that advances first, the Alpha team, sometimes supported by the Bravo team, and they can also refer to as small special forces units. That's basically where they get their name from. But Steve talked about the crime they didn't commit, and essentially this comes out that there was a covert mission to rob the Bank of Hanoi of gold bullion. With the intent of helping to end the Vietnam War. So they succeeded, but when they came back, their commanding officer had been murdered in a traitorous double cross, and his headquarters were burned. So there was no proof that they had robbed this bank on his
mission.
Orders.
Right.
And apparently there's some question as to whether or not they were also framed for his murder as well. So that's the crime they didn't commit, where they were sent to the military prison. Almost every episode features like gunfires, missiles, explosions, but usually people don't get hurt. There are sometimes implied deaths on screen. But no, Mr. T talked about this with the movie. He was not happy with it because he was like, there's explosions, but there's not actual violence.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the show was that the actual violence that was in the show, you never see anyone get shot. The A-team never kills anyone. And the worst you see is someone may have a limp or like have an arm in a sling, right? But they never actually kill the bad guys. They always basically set them up to be arrested or stopped or run them off. One of the other actors was like, I had my arm like shot or hit by shrapnel like almost every episode. But it's kind of interesting. So some fun facts. Mr. T never actually said I pity the fool. He called people suckers and fools sometimes, but he doesn't say that. He says that in Rocky 2. His jewelry. So Mr. T doesn't wear this anymore, but if you remember 80s T with like tons of gold chains, yes.
It weighed 35 pounds. He stopped wearing it because he's a Christian and he helped out after Hurricane Katrina. And he was like, I can't be that ostentatious when there's like people in need. But 35 pounds of jewelry and he's running with it on.
How much did his feather earrings weigh?
I don't know, but we're going to get to that in the episode because these feather earrings are a little bit too much. So what's interesting is that, this was first really a show for adults, but it became popular with kids, and there were toys, as there are with several of these shows. Did you have the toys?
I had the A-Team van.
Okay. Yeah, they had the van, And then 3 3/4-inch action figures, so I guess the size of G.I. Joes.
G.I. Joes, yep.
Hannibal, Baracus, Face, and Murdoch, as well as a 4-pack of bad guys. Cobra, Viper, Python, and Rattler. And then they had vehicles, so they had a jet, a van, a patrol boat, a Corvette, a helicopter, and then headquarters camp as well. They also had books, a 3-part comic book series, and also, not in the U.S., but in the U.K., they novelized popular episodes. You know how they have, novelizations of movies? They novelized popular episodes. So I just think that that's hilarious. And they also had choose-your-own-adventure books, where you could pretend that you were like, should the A-team turn to the left in the van or to the right? You know, like those kind of things.
And also the Mr. T cartoon.
Yes, the Mr. T cartoon. But he didn't approve of the Reboot movie. He said there was too much sex. He said it was too graphic for me. We ran on TV for 5 years without having to sex up the show. Nothing like the show we turned out every week. George Peppard played Hannibal. He's best known for Breakfast at Tiffany's and How the West Was Won.
Yep.
And Hannibal is actually based on a controversial Special Forces soldier known for heroic efforts he made to recover lost soldiers in Vietnam.
Okay.
So I thought that was kind of neat.
The interesting thing about George Peppard is that he, you know, like you said, he's known for Breakfast at Tiffany's. He was an established actor by the time he did the A-Team. They did 5 seasons of this show, but most people know him for the A-Team.
Yeah.
Like, when you think George Peppard, people are like, the A-Team!
Unless you're like Megan and you've never seen this show before, and then you're like, the guy from Breakfast at Tiffany's. Yeah. But speaking of which, I think, and we'll get into our memories of the show in a minute, but one of the things I'm guessing I never kind of got into this show is because they really didn't have female characters. And the first season, they have Amy, who we'll talk about. She was written out after she had a feud with George Peppard. But she's a reporter kind of following the exploits of the team and kind of a sidekick. After that, they tried to have other female sidekicks, and then they just decided, and this is a quote, "We wanted to have a masculine show in which men kissed the girls and made them cry when we wanted." And then the producer basically says some kind of sexist stuff about like men being the boss and being like God, and that the men here with no women are basically like gods of their own story. And I was like, I'm not going to quote that whole thing. But I think that it's kind of interesting that basically they were like, look, this is a very masculine show with guys from Special Forces, and they shoot things and they blow things up, and they're like white knights that rescue the princess. But it was one of the top shows in its first 3 seasons. Then, probably because of kind of repetition of storylines, it started to decline. Season 4. By the end of the 5th season, the network essentially just wanted it to be in syndication. And so they allowed it to have a 5th season, but they didn't pay attention to it. So the finale is a 2-part finale, and they showed the second half before the first half. That's literally how much they did not care about it. So yeah, it wasn't shown in the correct order, and I think that that's kind of funny that, you know, this is what happens and why I like doing this show with you, because we have these shows that were like a huge thing, and then they kind of die out, and then everybody forgets about them. But this was in the top 20 of shows for 3 or 4 years.
Yes.
Yeah, so those are some fun facts and a little bit of history about the A-Team. We're going to pause for our break, and when we come back, we'll talk about our memories, and then we'll get into our full recap. This podcast is supported by its creators
and listeners like you.
Help keep our show ad-free by visiting our website, stopruiningmychildhood.com.
There you can find links to our social media.
And this very podcast you're currently listening to.
Both Megan and I are authors, and you can find links to our books on our About page.
And on our Watch With Us page, you can find videos and links for all the shows and movies we discuss on the podcast.
And more importantly, links to buy the nostalgic snacks we review as well.
We also post bonus content about once a month.
So like, subscribe, and follow.
For a small independent podcast like ours, it really does make a difference. Thanks. And now, back to the show. All right, welcome back, everybody. Just as a reminder, in case you forgot, my name's Megan.
And I'm Steve.
And we're going to talk about our memories of this show. Do you have any?
I do, yes.
I don't have
You don't have any memories.
Well,
huh?
I didn't. I would have been pretty young for this show, and it would not have been. I don't. We talked about the kind of home I grew up in. I don't think I would have been allowed to watch it. Mm-hmm. My mom liked this show, at least for a couple of years, probably when there were female characters in it. Mm. And that is because one thing to know about Karen Cassidy is that she likes a good caper. She loves stories where it's like a team coming together to help people or to do something, So like Mission Impossible, she also she did not like the movie because it's about like one guy doing everything as opposed to the team. So yeah, I remember kind of very vaguely my mom watching this in like they had a TV in their bedroom and then she'd be like, get out. And that's about it. That's all and I remember Mr. T, obviously. But he was everywhere in the 80s.
So she was like, get out. And you're like, oh, man. You're like, I wonder what the adults do in there. Watch the 80s.
Yes, exactly.
That's it.
In their the only room in the house that had an air conditioner. Yeah, but I remember Mr. T... kind of because he's like this 80s icon. We talked about last time he was in Alvin and the Chipmunks as a cartoon character. I'm sure that I saw the Mr. T cartoon once or twice. They also had him do a lot of those tags for NBC of like the more you know and knowing it, like G.I. Joe had knowing is half the battle. But and he was also on like the Got Milk posters, and they had posters.
He was everywhere.
They had posters for literacy all over my libraries, my school library and my like home library. And one of them was Mr. T like reading a book.
Right.
Another one was like the Muppets reading a book. So yeah, it's just kind of funny. But talk about your memories.
Well, I remember the A-Team. I watched it. I was little, but I mean, I would have been 6. Through 10 or 11.
Yeah.
And so I remember watching the show quite a bit. I mean, it was one of those things you look forward to coming on. It's a little boy show, right? It's soldiers, and they're helping, they're good guys, and, there's action.
Have a cool band.
There's action, but it's not violent. Really, the action, the violence of the action are like cars flipping over, right? Explosions, but no one's ever in them, which is hilarious. They'd shoot at a car or something, and they'd wait till all the bad guys ran away to blow it up, right? But it was good. I remember all of the characters. I remember not just Mr. T, but Hannibal, Face, Murdoch. And it was a pretty cool show from what I remember. I do remember Mr. T all over the place. Yeah. I remember, of course, the black van with the red stripe, which was like their trademark, van. Which it seems to me now, looking back on it, is probably the worst vehicle to drive when you're on the run. Like, it's very noticeable. It's not like there's a lot of black vans with red stripes going down.
That's true.
With a spoiler on the back, right? And now, granted, the 80s had a lot of conversion vans, but that's probably not the best getaway vehicle. But yeah, and I remember Mr. T and cartoons. Like I said, I think there was a Mr. T cereal at one point.
Yeah, there was. Or was he on the Wheaties box, maybe? Or did he have a separate...
Mr. T cereal at one point.
Yeah, like Mr. T O's or something like that.
And, he was in Rocky, or Rocky 2.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just kind of all over the place. And so I recall that quite a bit. It was something. It probably wasn't like my top 2 or 3 shows, but I remember watching it quite a bit, and I remember liking it when I was a kid. So it brings up pretty good memories.
Yeah, I forgot to mention too that we watched these episodes on Amazon Prime. Mm-hmm. You do have to buy them at this point in time. I'm not sure why they're not on Peacock through NBC. They used to be on Tubi for free. So at the time of this recording, you have to buy the series or each individual episode on Prime. But I will definitely link that in our blog, as well as Steve was talking, I looked up Mr. T's cereal and I got a great picture of it. And you can still buy those on eBay, so I'll link that. And the Cadbury eggs, in case you want all the varieties available of Cadbury eggs.
It airs on the Esquire network, and so it's kind of all over the place. They probably moved They probably change what they offer.
Yeah, they probably rotate. So that's what I'm saying. I'm going to link the Amazon Prime version, but it might be on Tubi for free later or for free on Peacock. So we watched a couple of episodes. The first is The Children of Jonestown, Season 1, Episode 3. Oh, I'm sorry, The Children of Jamestown. Oh, I said Jonestown.
Yeah.
Because that's who it's based on. Oh, my goodness. So, can you give us a rundown, just a brief plot summary before we kind of get into the full thing?
Yeah, basically, this is it's interesting because this is the A-Team's first regular show.
Yeah, we couldn't find...
The pilot was part 1 and 2.
We couldn't watch the pilot.
And so, which is good. We started with, like, their first regular show. The A-Team is hired to save a girl from a cult by her, like, rich dad, which they do relatively early, but then they end up trying to save everyone else, too, as well.
Yeah, so this is kind of one of those things, it reminded me of... Law and Order SVU, where they'll have, like, ripped from the headlines, because Jonestown had only happened in 1978.
Yes. I wrote that down, too. This reminded me of Jonestown.
Yeah.
The cult leader, Martin James, I feel like, is Jim Jones.
It's Jim Jones.
Right.
If you don't know who that is, so Jim Jones he had this cult called the People's Temple. They were under pressure from the government because of some of the practices that they were doing, and they moved from California to Guyana, and a senator came to visit them. The senator was killed by them, and then he staged like a full like mass suicide where they all drank Kool-Aid. Now, there were a couple people who escaped, thankfully, but there were over 900 people who perished. I don't want to bring down the podcast because this is mostly a comedy podcast, but this is definitely an event that it was a huge catastrophe, and it certainly would have been still in the minds of people in 1983.
Yeah. Martin James, who's the cult leader in this show, his like goons dress as monks.
Yeah,
I guess so. They really want you to get the fact that it's like a religious cult.
Yeah,
he captures the A-Team when they're trying to kind of release other people. They get the girl away. Murdoch flies her to her dad. Then Murdoch goes back to save the A-Team. They're captured. They get away from the cult. They go to a farm. Of course, this is the first regular actual A-Team episode. But they go into what becomes their very famous section of the show about 3/4 through, where they build things. Right. They build a flamethrower Jeep. Mm-hmm. But they always rummage around for whatever they can find, and they build some kind of weaponry or some kind of vehicles that they can fight the bad guys with. And then there's Revenge Time, where they kind of basically they lure the bad guys onto the farm, which they've booby-trapped and prepared to, take them down.
Thank you for that summary.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the episode bit by bit. The first thing that I noticed is that we have a preview here. Now, they do the same thing. In a couple weeks, we'll watch Murder, She Wrote. And they do the same thing on Murder, She Wrote, where they give you a little preview of the full episode. But they showed us
way too much.
Almost the entire episode. We had to fast forward because it was like, maybe 3 minutes?
Yeah,
2 or 3
and it was
minutes?
way too much. It was showing people talking. I was like, this is too much.
And then they have this voiceover. Martin James has taken in youthful followers. One of those is Sheila Rogers. So that's like this voiceover. Is that kind of typical?
I don't think it was later. I think that's how they started.
This is just something how they kind of started. But they have, as Steve said, they're showing you what these people look like. So they're kind of like, all the followers were in white.
Yes.
Right? And then all the goons are in brown monk robes, which I can only guess that they were like, we should dress them all the same. They're a cult. And they went back into the wardrobe department, and there was, probably leftover from some other show, monk robes. We had a lot of witty banter in the beginning.
Hannibal is not scared of this cult leader, even when they're captured. There's a lot of witty banter back and forth and a lot of sarcastic remarks to the cult leader.
Like, you fill out that tunic pretty well.
Yeah.
Murdoch is playing around in the helicopter. They kind of have these, depending on how you see it, kind of cheesy lines, which, by the way, we had a lot in Manimal, too, which was around the same time. So this must have been kind of like a writing formula that we'd have a dramatic, lighten it up a little bit.
Right.
With some humor. So they're starting to do like basically they're con artists in a way in the first part of this.
Yes.
Right? And they're dressing up and like they're in a store, they're trying to get her out and they're trying to do it in a subtle way.
Yeah, you can't go into the cult compound, so they wait for some of the cult members, including her, to come out to get stuff from the store, like to get supplies to bring back to the cult compound, and that's where they intervene and basically steal her away.
And we have our first piece of big action where the monks are outside and members of the A-team attack one of the other monks inside, and they both go out the window.
Yes.
These two unsuspecting monks, and I'm hoping that it's sugar glass, but it shatters in this very like dramatic fashion. That was pretty neat. It was a lot, you know. They're soldiers, but we're playing with kind of like some very masculine tropes, and it reminded me of Old West movies. Yeah. Like the cowboys start fighting and they go over the bar
and they don't
and
actually
go out the window.
They don't attack a monk inside. Hannibal and Face get in a fake fight, and the two of them go through the window.
Right. Yes,
it's a distraction to get all the monks kind of away from the kids.
And then here's the thing that struck me is that Sheila, the girl that they're rescuing, is over the moon excited to be away from this cult. Mm-hmm. Like, she's very happy. And again, you could kind of see like the campiness of this, because if this show were being done today, they would, first of all, I think they would know a little bit more about like Stockholm Syndrome and brainwashing and things like that. But also, she's been through some pretty traumatic stuff, and she's just like, oh, thank you so much. I've been trying to leave for 18 months, but they keep reading our mail. Just walk away, Sheila.
Yeah.
They're not, but, so that's the thing, like, they're implying that they're holding her there with, like, guns, and they're reading the mail and things like that, but it's a lot less of, like, a psychological hold over them. So it's kind of simplified. I don't know. Mr. T finally comes into the picture. He kind of is reading his lines like they're on a book in front of him.
Well, he was new at it, I guess.
He was new at it. He seems like a nice guy, but
yeah,
he's not.
He helps them get her away, and
he's not the most subtle actor.
They all go back to try to help the cult, and that's when they are captured.
Yes, the team's captured, and Murdoch, though, is in the helicopter and has to go back.
Right. He's the one that he takes the girl back to her dad.
Now, we never find out through the whole series Murdoch's first name, but you can... Here, I didn't get as much that Murdoch was crazy as I did from the second episode that we watched. But he kind of seems to, like, take on different people's personalities, right? Is that kind of, like, part of his deal?
Yes. All we know of Murdoch, we don't know his real name. The only thing that comes out is they call him Howling Mad Murdoch.
That sounds about right. They capture the rest of the A-team. Murdoch's in the sky. And Face says, and I wrote this down exactly because this was like my highlight of this moment. Mm-hmm. He looks at one of the monks who has a huge gun and he goes, I will fear no evil. Thy rod and thy AR-15 will comfort me.
Yes.
Again. It's so cheesy, some of this dialogue, but that one did make me laugh.
And they do have Amy, the reporter, with them at this point, who she gets captured too. And it's interesting because the writers use Amy as almost a stand-in for us, right? Mm-hmm. She's asking the questions that you don't know about the A-team, so you're seeing them through her eyes. So, like, they're captured, but then they get put in this barn, and you realize that they kind of were captured on purpose, because she's like, oh my gosh, we're captured, what are we going to do? And then you see their specialties come out. Mm-hmm. Right? Face is like, well, you know, they don't really have a good setup. Like, you realize that when they were captured, they were all observing around them. Yeah. And BA's like, the armory's right up front, which is a bad spot for it, but it leaves it open to us. And so they've been, like, basically breaking down this whole area as they were being captured.
They're casing the joint, basically. And then they cut over to the cult leader, apropos of nothing. He's wearing sunglasses, and he stares off into the distance, and he says to some of his goons, I stopped dreaming. I used to dream, but now I've stopped. And then they go back to the A-team and what they're doing. Now that comes back later, but I just was like, it's so the editing. Oh my goodness.
Then they decide
the editing is not good.
Then the cult apparently decides to like execute the A-team, but like in like a hunting manner, where they're gonna like let them run and they're gonna hunt them. So they make them take off their shoes.
Yeah.
But then they give them sneakers to put on. And I'm like, what? Like, just let them keep their shoes then.
They're ethical.
Like, you wanted to make sure that they didn't sprain an ankle during the hunt?
Yeah, and during the hunt and throughout all the other scenes, too, we mentioned this, but Mr. T has his 35 pounds of gold chains on.
Yes.
And the classic mohawk. But he also has these long feather earrings that come down, like, to about his chest. They're probably like, what, maybe 5 inches?
I would say they're like
5
10,
or 6 inches
10 to 11 inches, yeah, from his ear down.
From his ear down, and he's running in these. And it's not just one in each ear. He's got, like, multiple holes, multiple piercings. Mm-hmm. So it's like... I'm sorry. This is just going to be me laughing through the whole podcast. But he's running, and these feathers, and I'm like... Those seem like a safety hazard if you're on this type of a team.
And surprisingly, he's not the one that gets hurt.
Yeah. But what you were saying about Amy is that they say to her, she's like worried, and she's also like, I don't know. She seems like jealous at certain times
when Face pays attention to other girls.
Yeah. But they say she's like, oh my god, I don't know, maybe we're gonna die, and they're like, we all gotta die, Amy, except death. That way we ain't got no fear.
That's Mr. T.
That's Mr. T. And you're like, what? Okay, Amy, you're a reporter. Just accept death. And then they steal Hannibal's boot. So that seems to be a point for him when they take his shoes.
Yeah, when they make them take their shoes off and put sneakers on, they take Hannibal's boots. And he's like, I'll be back for those.
Yes.
And I just didn't understand the point of making them change shoes. Like, I get if you're going to make them take their shoes off and they got to run barefoot, because that, like, hinders them.
Yeah.
But to give them another pair of shoes,
I don't know.
Why did you make them take... Unless it was that they're all the same pair of shoes, and then it made me think about that cult that all wore the Nikes and killed themselves.
Yeah.
But that was after
They were
the
way
18.
later, though. Yeah, and then they find... They pretty much make a bomb out of art supplies that they found. They find these art supplies, and that's how they make their bomb. So, as Steve said, that's the point where they start making something.
Right. Yeah, they get away from the hunt group, and they end up at this local farm, and who doesn't want to get involved, but they basically say, well, we're going to take these guys out, and they won't be in your hair anymore.
Yeah.
And that's where they end up making this flamethrower Jeep, which is pretty cool. Amy all of a sudden seems to know how to make stuff too, so I'm assuming maybe she's picked some things up along the way with the A-team.
Face is flirting with the farmer's daughter.
Big time, yes.
Big time, yeah.
Because Face gets hit in the head with a rifle, and of course that's your injury. You don't see any blood,
right? No.
And they just help him, like he has an arm around both Hannibal and Amy, and they're carrying him in almost like he's woozy, and then he puts his head down on the farmer's daughter's lap.
Yeah, and she's like, ooh la la, man is here.
Yes. And Amy doesn't want
Amy
any part of that.
does not like it. You can see why they wrote Amy out, because it was kind of hindering. If she gets together with one of the guys, it hinders the kind of storylines.
It hinders chemistry with new people. And
it definitely does. So at any rate, they put together. The guy's like, "Well, I've got some art supplies in my barn," and they go out and they make these things out of the art supply, and then they set them up around the cult.
It's not art supplies, really. He says
that it's art supply. I know he's a sculptor, but he says these are metal, my art supplies.
Right, so he has torches and metal and things like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. As I'm saying art supplies, people are probably picturing watercolors.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah,
I've got some cotton balls in finger paints
and
in the
Elmer's
garage.
glue.
Yeah,
yeah, but so at any rate, they pull it off. Mm-hmm. And the cult leader is basically left for the police to come and get him. And the cult leader's like, this is why I stopped dreaming.
Yeah.
Because things were coming to an end, and because he almost sees the error of his ways, I guess. I don't know.
Right, yeah.
Again, not really.
Yeah, they wrap them. Basically, they they get them to surrender, and they hold them under guard until they see the law enforcement coming, which is the National Guard.
Yeah.
Which I was in the National Guard. We've never responded to cults or anything of that nature.
What about with David Koresh?
That was FBI.
FBI.
So yeah. But anyway. So
then we watched episode 11 of season 3,
The Bells of St. Mary's.
We kind of just picked something at random from the middle of the show before it kind of went into decline.
Yeah, this was in season 3, episode 11. So we jumped from 1983 to 1985.
Yep.
They've gotten their feet under them a little bit.
Yeah, the acting was a lot better.
Yeah, this starts off, the A-team is kind of like, in between jobs, they just hang in communities. So here they're back at Face's original hometown, and he and BA are coaching football for his high school.
Which I was like, isn't he still on the run? Wouldn't all the sisters of this high school be able to turn him in?
Well, apparently he's well loved.
Yeah. So this is St. Mary's High School. Mm-hmm. Well, the name The Bells of St. Mary's is from an old movie, but here the Bells are a singing group kind of connected to a family from this high school.
Yes, the quarterback for the football team, this is how the team gets roped in. They notice something's wrong with the quarterback. They follow him and find out that his sister is the lead singer for this singing group called The Bells, which is fairly pretty popular because they've all heard of her.
So the singing group is in trouble because they have they're trying to get away from their former manager. The manager is basically harassing them, and
they have a really bad contract where basically the manager gets 90% of the income.
Which I think is based on the guy from Motown.
Could be, yeah.
Very Gordy.
And then their contract is up, and he's trying to force them to re-sign. So they've run back to the one girl's hometown. So the A-team gets involved. Come to find out, though, this guy is not really in charge. He's funded by a much higher level, Las Vegas businessman. Yeah,
which is it's kind of clear that this is a mob guy, and you're like, why does he care about this little singing group? Because they're not hugely popular, and he's like, because I collect things, and nobody says no to me.
Yeah.
So you could kind of see how this could happen. So when we come and we see them, they're playing football. Mr. T, this time no feathers, but he does have a powder blue trucker hat because he's a coach now. So
yes.
That's his coaching hat. And there's this guy, Danny Diamond is their manager, and I put, looks like a disco version of Colonel Sanders. He looks exactly like Colonel Sanders from KFC, but with a 70s, late 70s, early 80s suit.
Well, that was the fake manager. That was Hannibal in disguise. Hannibal was Danny Diamond.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
When he's sorry, I misspoke. When he's pretending to be their manager, but that's the costume he puts on.
Oh, yeah, that's the costume he decides to go with.
The women here, here's what I found interesting about this episode. We won't go piece by piece with this one because we're running on time, but four women in the singing group. They're all women of color. Mm-hmm. So we have a few women who are African American, a few who might be Hispanic or might be multiracial, whatever the case may be. They never comment on the interracial relationships because Face is flirting with them, but then so is Hannibal as well.
Each of the ladies kind of has an eye out for the A-team members.
But Face kind of has two ladies, and Hannibal says he better practice his juggling.
Yes.
Which is this show, if you get into film theory, this is a very male gaze show. It's a masculine, a male driven show. So the women are only seen through that lens of the guys. Having said that, I thought they're just all girls are pretty. That's how they're treating it. And it was surprising to me that they were doing that in 1985 because it wasn't that long before that we had things about anti-miscegenation laws and stuff like that in terms of what Hollywood could show and what it couldn't. So for a TV show, I think that was pretty forward thinking.
Yeah.
Not how they treated them as women, but the fact that they never comment on the fact that they're people of different races. Right. And I think today they probably would.
And of course now you have the A-team is saving them from this controlling, violent manager.
Right.
His guys have guns, and they come to try to intimidate the Bells, but are outmatched by the A-team, who are professionals, and then the mob kind of big head boss guy sends pros who also are outmatched by the A-team.
Yeah, what I liked here is that they do this thing where they spray paint on the guy, and again, you're like, this is so cheesy, but Hannibal kind of explains, this is the plan because he keeps sending these goons, he's just going to send his men, we want him involved directly.
Yeah.
Like, we want to get to the big boss, and the only way to do that is to make him angry. And sure enough, he's in the car, and he's like, I'm going to handle this myself.
Right. So then they can catch him in the act and get him arrested.
As opposed to all of his lower-level people that they don't. And then we have, of course, I love this in 80s shows when we have, like, the song break. The bells are practicing in what look to be very large skirts. Like, these are, like, short... Well, there's two kinds of skirts. There's, like, a skirt with shorts underneath. But these are, like, wide-legged shorts. Mm-hmm. And, like, a jumpsuit. So, and big shoulder pads. I love it. I love the 80s fashion here. But the bells are all practicing, and they're singing Right Straight Into My Heart, which is this very bouncy 80s pop song that really... It could have been a real song.
Right.
It really could have been. And I looked up the lead singer because I was like, she's pretty talented. Mm-hmm. I was like, is this, the other girls had only really done this show and maybe one or two others where they're like, woman number 4. But Charlotte King was in Mad Men, Deep Space Nine. She was Cisco's wife in Deep Space Nine.
That was all after this.
All after this. She was in Straight Outta Compton. Mm-hmm. She's been in a number of things, and none of them she sings. So I don't know if this is actually her singing. Right. But in terms of acting, she's kind of acting circles around some of the other people in this. Yeah, she's really, really good. Really good. They're like, she says, there's going to be trouble. And Mr. T goes, trouble provides our main source of employment. I love that line. And then there's capers. They dress up as mailmen, save the day.
Hannibal does 2 disguises this episode. He disguises himself as Danny Diamond.
Yeah.
And then he disguises himself as a mailman to the same guys that he disguised himself as, and they don't understand that's him.
It's like Sally Field not knowing that Robin Williams is
Mrs. Doubtfire.
Right. But one of the things that I liked about this too is that the capers are kind of fun. And we haven't mentioned that throughout this entire episode, Murdoch has been worshiping Mr. T because he's seen the movie with Ronald Reagan where he says, let's do it for the Gipper, that football movie. So he's seen that movie and he thinks that Mr. T is just the greatest football coach ever. So he's been trying to act like Mr. T through the whole thing, which is also hilarious. And then we get back to the football at the end after the girls are saved. Hannibal wants to go and date the girls, and she's like, we finally found ourselves some real men.
Yes. And so apparently the A-team's going to take the ladies out on a date afterwards.
Yes.
But again, we don't see any of that. No. There's no sex or anything like that. It's just
it's just that they're going to go out with them, right?
Yeah.
And then Murdoch gets angry because Mr. T doesn't give a big inspirational speech.
Yeah, and he's
instead,
like, maybe he's not the leader I thought he was.
Instead, he just stares at the guys menacingly, because that's what Mr. T does. So I thought that was kind of funny as well. So that rounded out the 2 episodes, and then we
watched the A-Team movie from 2010.
So here's, what are your general thoughts about the A-Team movie?
I mean, the casting was not bad. Liam Neeson, Bradley Cooper, right? You've got a lot of good casting here.
Jessica Biel
is brought in, so there's your girl.
Yeah.
Right? She's not part of the A-Team, but she's in a power position with other spots. I mean, I think they did a fairly good job of modernizing the story. It shows them get together, it shows them wrongfully accused of their crime, then break out, and then basically trying to clear their name.
And Jessica Biel essentially plays the character of like the person in the military who's trying to put them in prison.
Right.
So I did like that it portrayed this story. I thought that was kind of fun, but much like the original show, for me, the long car chases, the long scenes where they're MacGyvering stuff together and putting together like bombs or cars or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit dull. It's a little bit dull. I think that Jessica Biel is a good choice for this movie because even on Seventh Heaven, she played kind of this like, she's like a girl next door, kind of has like a sporty kind of vibe to her. She doesn't really in real life, I don't think, play a lot of sports, but she can kind of hold her own. I guess that's my point. And yeah, the casting was good. I even liked, I don't know who the guy was who played the part of Baracus. I can't remember his name at the moment. Liam Neeson played Hannibal. Bradley Cooper plays Face. I did think the casting was good. It's just that somehow it kind of didn't all come together for me. I think it was just the editing. And I also think it was cool to see the origin story, but the whole point of the A-Team is that they're together helping people, so we didn't really see that here.
Yeah, it's Quentin Jackson that plays Mr. T-Spot, and he's mostly known as Rampage Jackson. He's an MMA fighter who tried to transfer over to acting.
The other thing is that they did change, like they have Baracus, who's the Mr. T character. Mm-hmm. They have that he was in a different unit. He's also Special Forces. They kind of have this whole thing of like how the team comes together.
Right.
Now, I did like how they broke out of prison. That was fun.
Yes.
And especially when they went to get Murdoch out of the insane asylum that he had been put in.
The psychiatric
facility. That was really, that was kind of a good time. So, like, I felt like it is okay.
Its reception on Rotten Tomatoes, it's got a 49%.
Okay.
Out of 208 critics.
Yeah, that's about how I feel.
Metacritic gave it a 47 out of 100, which is about the same. Mm-hmm. Entertainment Weekly said it's trash so compacted it glows.
I don't think it's complete trash, but I can see why they canceled the sequel.
Time Magazine said the best in a mediocre lineup of summer action flicks.
Well, yeah, and probably in 2010 there were a number of action flicks that year, my guess would be.
Yes, and Rolling Stone said big, loud, ludicrous, and edited into visual incomprehension.
That was the biggest thing. It was the editing. I think that the casting was very good. I think that the plot line wasn't bad. I kind of enjoyed it. I really do think that it was the editing for me.
I prefer George Peppard over Liam Neeson as Hannibal. I did like Bradley Cooper as Face.
I thought he was great as Face. I thought he had the right amount of like humor for that part as well. Bradley Cooper sometimes says things with a smirk.
He does, yeah.
It reminded me of early Bradley Cooper Party Down. If you've ever seen that show, it only lasted 2 seasons, and Bradley Cooper was only in one of those 2 seasons, but yeah.
Its response was basically. I liked it. If you're in the mood for an action movie, I didn't think it was terrible. I think if you liked A-Team, you'll have that nostalgia to it, which I did, and I thought, like I said, that they did a fairly good job of following that. I could see where Mr. T, given his beliefs, would be critical of it, because it was more violent. There was some more innuendo, sex at least.
And it's a remake.
And to be honest, I could see Mr. T's a Christian, and they tried to bring Quentin Jackson as B.A. Baracus. There was a character arc where they tried to make him more of a pacifist as well.
Yeah.
But they did it through Eastern religion, like Zen and Dalai Lama and things like that. And I could see where that would put off Mr. T, who's a Christian.
Right, but you're right. It could have been a Christian.
There was initially going to be a sequel in the works.
Yeah.
They canceled it after it had a disappointing reception in the theater. Although it cost $110 million to make, worldwide it grossed $177 million. So it made money, which is more than you can say for other films.
Yeah.
But it didn't make a lot of money.
And for an action film, especially worldwide, they look for higher numbers.
Right.
Because action films usually do well in the world market because you don't have to have much translation.
Yeah. Just say this is a good transition from the reception of that to the reception of the A-Team show.
All right, talk about that for a minute.
You mentioned a little bit of it about the seasons. The A-Team debuted in 1983 on NBC. It was ranked 10th. It was on a Tuesday time slot, and that was actually the best ranking for NBC show on that Tuesday time slot at the time.
Nice.
The second season, it was ranked 4, so it jumped even more from already a good slot. It stayed on Tuesday night, it jumped to 4th. And it was the best NBC show behind Cosby Show.
So that's huge as well, because I know one of the other top shows, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, was Dallas.
Right.
So you're up against some pretty heavy hitters. MacGyver, I think, was in the top, or not MacGyver, so many shows that start with M. I'm like MacGyver, Matlock.
Magnum P.I.
Magnum P.I. is the one I'm thinking of.
But were those all NBC shows?
No, those weren't NBC shows. I'm
right.
just saying that's what the general competition was in those years.
In the third season, it dropped to 13, which still wasn't bad.
Still in the top 20.
In the fourth season, it dropped to 30th, which was its lowest rating it had. And so they did decide to try to give it a 5th season. So they moved it from a Tuesday night slot to a Friday night slot for the 5th season.
Oh, that's a death slot.
And in the 5th season, it dropped tremendously. It dropped like another 40 or 50 spots.
Yeah.
It just wasn't doing what it had anymore. And so, as you mentioned, they didn't decide to even. I think by Super Bowl time, it was pretty much done.
Right.
So they decided not to re-sign for another 9 episodes, and they pretty much just canceled it out.
So they had most likely they had 15 instead of like 26. Yeah. Or maybe 13 instead of 24. That's about what those runs are. And that's unusual as well, because usually a show will get picked up the first season will be the shortest season, and then it'll have standards from there on out.
Yes.
That's kind of unfortunate. Having said that, I am glad that they were able to have a finale, because a lot of times when shows get into that position, they just
never...
And you never find out what happens.
Yep. Now, it was interesting because... It's also, as you mentioned, they had enough episodes for syndication. So they went into syndication right after that. And it's actually had kind of a cult following in syndication.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's been syndicated throughout NBC. It's been syndicated throughout the world. Spanish-speaking countries, the UK had a pretty good reception. And so it was picked up in quite a few places. And
I would imagine, too, that might be where a lot of the people our age, they probably watched it in syndication. I mean, if you think about, like, I know that there were boys my age who were into that show and like had the van maybe, but a lot of times I'm thinking they were like 8, 9, 10. They probably were watching it syndicated. I doubt that they were watching it on Friday night.
I'm going to say that happens a lot. Like there was... and we'll talk about, like, Quantum Leap, which we'll talk about sometime. I love Quantum Leap. I remember watching Quantum Leap somewhat as a kid, but where I really made long-lasting memories, I saw it in syndication on the Sci-Fi Network.
Yeah.
When I was older and saw all the episodes. They'd run marathons.
Yeah, and the A-Team, I feel like, might have been one of those shows that got put on, like, TV Land.
Probably,
like that. Or they may have even... I feel like I remember seeing it once or twice... Again, I don't think I watched a full episode, but just seeing it on Saturday mornings, like after the standard cartoon block, that they'd show a rerun of the A-Team.
Yeah, it could have been, yeah. I could even have seen it in the... Now, keep in mind, this ends in 85, right? And so you start to have a lot of... At that point, you still didn't have a lot of network television, right?
Right.
So it was near the end of the 80s, early 90s when your TNT, USA, all those networks started splitting. And I could see them showing the A-Team in syndication, like, for content and to get viewers.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking... Like, when you had a channel like TV Land, they would pick up 1 or 2 shows. They would show them all the time until they got 2 or 3 more shows, and then they'd show those a bunch, and then they'd start mixing it up. TBS is a perfect example. Remember when TBS used to show things at 11:05 and 11:35 instead of exactly 11 and 11:30? So funny. But this is the kind of show that would have been on there. So, having said that, that's what the critics thought. What do we think? Steve Hall, does it hold up?
How many Mohawks out of 10 are we going to give the A-Team original series?
Yeah, we're not counting the movie.
We talked about the movie already. So the A-Team original series, I think it holds up. I think there's a lot of dated pieces to it because it was 83 to 87.
Yeah.
Right? And you mentioned there's a few different cultural things that don't hold up as much anymore. But I think it was a decent action show. I think it was family friendly. Like, I would, if I had a kid who was maybe 8, 9, 10, I would watch it with them. Mm-hmm. You know, there wasn't sex in it, really. There wasn't any actual violence. And if you have especially little boys that are interested in the Army and stuff like that, I could see that being a family-friendly show.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So with that all being said, I would give it a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm kind of close to where you are. I just feel like the depiction of women is really troubling to me, and the way that it's edited as well. The editing's a little slow, kind of, you know, that's how those 80s shows were. I think if you redid this show and you had it be, like, not the Reboot movie, but I'm saying if they brought it back as a show with a cast that was both men and women, I think it could be really cool. But for me, I'm at like a 5, I guess. So...
Yeah!
5.5 Mohawks for the A-Team. And 5.5 out of 10 for the show. 2 out of 5
Mohawks for the
Cadbury eggs. But hey, listen, 5 out of 5 for the caramel ones.
The chocolate and caramel, we have our endorsement.
But the original with the fondant, no. Now I know what those judges think on those shows where they're always like, why'd you use so much fondant on the cooking shows? Now I know how they feel. Mouthful of fondant is not that fun. But... you know, kind of a middle score for the A-Team. In some ways it holds up, in other ways it doesn't, but you can always have fun watching it, and I'm going to link those on our blog, Watch With Us, at StopRuiningMyChildhood.com. And next week, our fan request is Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
The good one
from the 70s. And I might take one for the team and watch the other one that Tim Burton did.
You'll be solo on
it. I'm going to be doing that by myself. So that's it for us this week. Join us next week for Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.